welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so pleased to welcome Stephen Morris, longtime supporter of the show, on to talk about his novel, The Guardian of the Palace.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yes, so have we. We're delighted to have you on.
But before we get into true book talk, first, what's something great that happened recently?
So I had my 17th wedding anniversary last Friday. So that was fun.
Congratulations.
Thanks. We went out and celebrated in a dimly lit restaurant where we were struggling to see our food, but we had fun.
What kind of cuisine?
We went to a steakhouse.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I enjoy that. So I think she picked it for me, but it was a strange ambiance. It was very dark for a steakhouse.
I hope that even if you couldn't see your food, it tasted fantastic.
It tasted great, yeah. And I got my books in a bookstore, so I get two great things. That was cool.
Oh, nice. What bookstore for people who want to go out and buy your books?
It's in our local Barnes & Noble, so you'd have to come to Austin to get it. Actually, I can tell from the purchases that someone else got it. Some other bookstore did too. I can't tell who. So there's a few floating out there mysteriously.
And is that the book that we're going to be discussing today?
Yes.
Is included?
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, I was excited about that. But that's my good things.
Yeah.
Those are very good things.
More than one good thing is great. Yeah.
My good thing is that I looked at my lime tree and it has buds on it. So I think if all goes well, I'll have limes this year.
Right.
This is the first year since I've planted it. I planted it 3 years ago or so. This is the first year that it's actually budded. So I'm hoping that I will actually get, even if it's just one or two, that'll still be exciting.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, we'll see.
Very nice.
Well, mine is very silly. I tried combos for the first time.
Combos?
Combos of?
They're a snack food. I think they're more popular on the East Coast because I've only heard of them in like podcasters talking.
It's like a packaged snack food thing?
Yeah, they're pretzels filled with liquid cheese.
Oh.
And I famously hate pretzels, but these were pretty damn good.
Wait, you hate pretzels?
I hate pretzels. Well, not like the big ones that you dip in cheese, like not bread pretzels.
The small crunchy ones?
Yeah.
I was going to say, whenever we go to Galley, we get pretzels.
Yeah, completely different.
Big pretzels. Okay. I get it.
Big soft pretzels, thumbs up. Tiny crunchy pretzels, thumbs down. Unless they're filled with liquid cheese, then thumbs up again.
So the tiny ones were covered with liquid cheese? Or filled with liquid cheese?
Yeah, they're kind of like cylindrical.
Oh, okay.
They're
I
like,
get it.
Yeah, so they're not exactly pretzel shaped, but that's what they're called.
I quite enjoy strawberry yogurt covered pretzels.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
They are quite good.
I don't like the peanut butter filled pretzels because the peanut butter is too dry. It doesn't actually help. Anyway, tried those. I loved them. They're a great trash snack.
All right.
And what's everyone drinking this evening?
So I have Austin Beer Works Invisible Hand. It's just a new beer for me. Hazy IPA. I actually looked for something from Deschutes because that's what I used to drink when I was up in Portland. And we usually have it, but the store was out this week. They said they hadn't gotten a shipment for a month. Like,
Oh, darn.
Can't celebrate with my Northwesterner.
But you have a local beverage, which is just as good, if not better.
Yeah. I like supporting the local places, and they're pretty good about it now. Austin's got a pretty big beer industry going now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And you?
I have a raspberry lemonade with vodka, channeling early 20s Lily.
I like it.
I have some bottle of wine.
Mysterious.
Not a box.
Not from a box. My bottles usually are proper bottles. Not always, but usually.
I take that as a personal offense.
Yes,
as I'm sure it is meant to be.
That was a dig specifically at you, Lily.
Well, this is actually a book podcast, so has anyone read anything good lately other than the book we're about to discuss?
I've still been reading Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which continues to be good.
Good.
Yes.
I read The Fragments by Minu Freitag. I don't know if I'm probably slaughtering her name, but I quite enjoyed that. It was very good. She's a New Zealander, I believe, but I think of German descent from some of the comments she made in her book. Very good story.
What's it about? It's not a title that I'm familiar with.
It's based on the concept that when societies get ideas that are too diverse, reality actually splits. And so they get these fragmented realities, and some people learn how to travel between them. And, it makes a good traveling between different worlds kind of story, but she actually puts a lot of science into how all the pieces fit together, which I quite enjoy. I like seeing someone not just wash over it, but say, yes, and this piece must work like this, and this must work like this. But she does it all through the spoken text, not just descriptive text, which made it all move the whole time. It was cool.
That's awesome. That sounds really good. Not that my TBR needs to be longer. Gosh, I did fall down a Witcher fan fiction hole. I've caved and read a couple of modern alternate universes. So like you take the characters and like, but what if they were in the real world?
And working at a coffee shop?
No. I was like, I know I don't like those. And then I read them anyway and was like, oh yeah, I don't know what I expected. They were fine. It just they were just a little cheesy for my taste. But they were like 10,000 words long, so it's like, meh, who cares?
Did you watch the What If Marvel movies?
I've seen like some clips of it.
Similar concept. I couldn't get into it either. I watched a few of them and I was like, eh.
Yeah, I do love the thought process. Those are always conversations that I love to have. But I don't know if I need someone to tell me what they like. I want to be part of that conversation. I don't want to just sit there and listen to it.
You want to write the story.
Yeah. Which is too bad for everyone who has to sit there and listen to me right now. But I did read a real book for once, Guardian of the Palace by Stephen J. Morris. I think you've heard of it.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And one of the first things that struck me was how many like graphics and images you included. Not like a huge amount, but there was always like a calendar chart at the beginning of the chapters, and we had a couple of images throughout the story.
I think there's 4 now in the latest release. I think there's 4 in it. Probably not in the one you have.
Well, there were definitely a couple. And I did find myself flipping back to the picture of the palace on the back of the book for like a visual reference quite a bit. So I really appreciated it. And I was wondering if you could tell us about like the decision to include visuals along with your prose, and also like what that process was like.
It was partly just a decision based on I've always liked visuals. I thought, it's my book. I'm self-publishing it. I can put what I want in it. I might as well put what I like in it. I included a few, I think 2 in the original release. And then as I started making the next books, I got where I was putting 4 in each of them. So I was like, I got to go back and put 4 in the first book. So it ended up with 4 pictures in it. And I think they all have 4, maybe 5 pictures in them now. And it's funny, a lot of people, overwhelmingly, people have said they like it. I had one person put in their review, if only he hadn't put pictures in here, I would have liked the book.
Wow.
She said it ruined her mental image of what the characters looked like. And she was shot after that.
Oh, that's weird.
Such a strange. Okay. I mean, I can understand someone saying this wasn't to my taste. I personally enjoyed it, but like what works for one person isn't going to work for everyone. But
nope, I get it. Absolutely.
But to say that it ruined your enjoyment of the book, I find that's a step too far.
She still gave me quite a good rating, so
that's good.
Didn't ruin it that much.
I feel like there's such a trend right now for trad pub books to have like images of people, like not art, but like I guess photographs are still art. You know what I mean? But photography of people, especially in like, I would say women skewed fantasy novels. There's always just like a girl looking on the cover. And how does that not ruin your mental image of the main character?
I definitely also see a lot of trad published books or authors have art created for their characters that they then like post, and it's like quote unquote official art. So again, same question, like
yeah. That's just such a weird hill to die on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we won't tear apart that poor reviewer too much more.
especially since she still gave you a good review.
Yeah. She still gave me a good review.
One of the things that struck me when I first started reading this was its non-linear narrative. So you jump back and forth in time.
And it gets much worse if you read the next books.
Worse? That was not a qualitative statement.
Yeah, that was not a complaint.
Okay. It gets more severe.
Okay.
More extreme?
Extreme, I think. There we go. I agree with that.
But can you talk a little bit about both your decision to do it that way and also how you used that nonlinear narrative to introduce information to the reader and like to build tension?
So yeah, I started the book out more linear than it was. Places in there where there's more distinct flashbacks, those were there originally. Like when we're going back to, I don't know what I can say in the non-spoiler section, but
4 years ago.
there you go. Those were intentional, but originally the first part was all linear, and I had somebody who was editing for me and said, it is really too slow. You need to up the tension. And I went back and rearranged the days and put those calendars in there so that hopefully the calendars would make it more clear. But I think it helped up the tension so that you could see immediately that something was going wrong instead of having to wait and find out that something was going wrong. And then you just sort of inched towards, all right, what was the crux of what went wrong? And then we can move forward from there. I think it was only 19, 20-ish chapters that were sort of mixed up in time like that. Is that right?
I'd say, yeah, the first maybe quarter of the book.
Yeah.
It is really nice, though, because that way we get the introduction of that fantasy element right
Quickly.
away.
Yeah.
But then we have to wait. And so like it really did sort of, yeah.
She was dead on. She also ripped out 30,000 words, so you can thank her for that too. It's a much shorter and more succinct book. It is a better book with her edits, for sure.
Well, this book is I would say an urban fantasy. It takes place in the real world in New York City, among some other places, but definitely involves the introduction of fantasy elements that we would not expect to see in the real world. However, we're still cemented in the familiar because you use a lot of like brand names.
I do, which I don't know if I'm allowed to do, but I do.
Oh, I love that shit. Like, I know that that's definitely a polarizing thing. Some people can't stand it. And again, they say it breaks immersion or whatever. But like, no, if you're actually going somewhere, you're pulling up Uber on your phone. That's normal. And to me, it just makes it feel so much more familiar and relatable.
Good.
So I love it. They go to the cheesecake, or they talk about the Cheesecake Factory. It's like, oh yeah, that menu. I know that menu.
That picture on the front cover was actually from a trip we made to New York back in, 2012 or something. So I used that picture and then did, some sort of app to go change the formatting, make it look drawn, and then put the hand in front of it. But that trip is what I was thinking of in my mind when I was setting all the geography for it, right? They went here, they went here. So I had enough places in mind for where they would go that I thought I could stitch things together in a fairly consistent with the real world manner. How would you get here from here?
So is that also where some of the jokes about how small New York apartments come from, that trip?
Yes, we got to see some of that. We had a friend who showed us some things there, but it is pretty funny comparing the size there to the houses we live in Texas. I mean, it's very different. Which is where she's from. She talks about her apartment being smaller than the bedroom of her place in Texas, which I think is true.
I would believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about population density a lot in that book.
I was going to say, like, the comparison of, like, very small apartments and then with the very plot-relevant concept of population density makes the whole thing very visceral and personal in a way that I think I'm just going to vaguely say monsters aren't necessarily.
Fair. Yeah, that was part of the intent.
Our main character, I would say Red is our main character.
Yes.
We have a couple of different first-person perspectives, but we get the most from Red by far.
Yes.
She is retired military, and there's a huge theme in this book of adjusting to civilian life, but then it gets further complicated by introducing this factor of discovering that fantastic creatures exist. So there's that idea of trying to adjust to civilian life, which is supposed to be familiar, but it isn't anymore. And then it's not actually familiar because of this crazy additional element added.
Which I think she kind of liked. I think it felt more natural for her to get into this weird place than it was to get into civilian life.
Exactly. It almost made it easier for her because she was like, great, I have a crisis to solve.
It was sort of supposed to. Like, all right, I'm having trouble adjusting, but this I can do. This panic-stricken, something's going wrong with the world, I can handle this.
I can't decorate my apartment, but I can save the world.
So as we've mentioned, Red does have this military background, and she is coming off of her experiences there, trying to readjust to civilian life, not entirely successfully. How much research did you have to do to develop this storyline for her?
I did do some. I have some books on the shelf over there that I used as reference, but it was interesting because one of the books, which is mostly about guns and how to write well about guns, one of the things it says up front is read all this, understand it, then discard it and use what you need to make your story. So it is interesting. So I thought it through. I tried to read some, and at some point I went, all right, I think I have enough. I don't need to pin it down to reality that closely. I did have a lot of friends who were in the military, and I drew on some of their experiences too, not just asking them, but also using some of their stories from their past. A little bit of reality.
Hopefully not quite as traumatic as Red's story.
No. Nobody's stories were that traumatic.
So you did some research and you did some primary source research. How much planning do you do when you write?
Oh, a ton. So I what do they call them? There's pantsers and planners, right? So I would say that I am sort of a way station planner. Like I have points in the story where I need things to come together. But then as I start writing, I just let the characters do what they want. So a lot of things will still even surprise me as I go through the story, but I definitely have points that I'm trying to get to in the story. So this series is 4 books. They're all released. And I actually wrote all 4 of them before I released the first one, at least first draft of all of them. So the first draft of all of it was done. I had to make sure that everything would fit together before I started. And then I went back and released each book about 6 months apart because that's how long it takes me to go and edit something even after I've written it. So it's a fairly long process for me. I definitely like to see where something's going the whole time.
That's really interesting. Also, you have just answered one of the questions we were saving for the spoiler section.
Uh-oh.
But to kind of...
Did I say a spoiler?
No. You didn't give a spoiler, but we did have a question about writing the series that we were going to ask in the spoiler section. I'll just go ahead and kind of bring it up now. So you said that you essentially wrote all 4 books before you published. Did you then, when you were finished with writing the series, did you have to go back and make very many changes?
Oh, yes.
To book 1? Okay.
Yeah, I did. Actually, to all of them, because the first draft, I don't think it was completely consistent, right? I had my waypoints and things that I said, all right, this came together. But when I went back and looked at it all, it was like, I completely dropped this thread. It went nowhere. I either need to connect it into something or cut it out. So yeah, a good bit of edits. But the first one the most. The first one changed a lot.
Hold that thought. We'll come back. We see some really vivid characterization of Red, who still describes the U.S. military as an organization that is, quote, working to improve life for communities around the globe, despite the betrayals and trauma that she experienced during her service. So can you tell us how you used that first-person perspective to give us these kinds of insights into your characters' personalities?
So hold on. I know that we have someone who doesn't like first-person writing.
It can be a tool used for good.
I feel like a trap is being set for me right now. Go ahead, put your foot in here.
No, justify it. Why would you do this to me?
I'm sorry, ask the question again. I was having too much fun with that.
No, it's true. I'm biased, but I know that about myself. But like, you made a choice. You chose to put this book into first-person perspective. So how did you use that to sort of give the reader a deeper understanding of your characters?
So to back up a little, I actually think first person works better in discovery kind of books than third person, because I always feel like I'm always feel cheated when I'm reading third person and then a piece of information is revealed late in the story that the omnipresent third person could have revealed earlier. And I feel like with first person, you can hedge that some, she didn't know it, so you can't reveal it yet. And I try to use that to advantage as things get unveiled in the plot. But I do try to get the character to both have a beginning point of what their psyche is and their beliefs are and how that might change. And it changes more as you go through the series than it does in the first book. There's not, I guess, enough time. There's too much action in the first book, not enough time to change. But the perspectives do change and the person evolves through, or not just her, but the people, the characters evolve some through the stories. Boy, I went completely off on a tangent there. I am not answering your question. I guess I don't have a good answer for your question.
I mean, that was a good answer. You don't lose points for going off topic.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I finally found the right place.
Certainly not on this podcast where we go off topic all the time.
I feel home.
Yeah.
I don't read a ton of urban fantasy just because that's not what I tend to gravitate towards. But I really enjoyed this. And it struck me as being a kind of urban fantasy that I wasn't very familiar with.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Yeah, it's a little different.
Can we talk about that for a second? I guess.
Would you let me finish my question? I mean, you can ask your question. That's fine. I'll just do all the lead up for it.
When I think of urban fantasy, I think of like vampires and shit.
Yep. Vampires and werewolves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's all. Were you going there, Sarah? You can finish. I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, like, could you talk a little bit about any specific fantasy inspirations that went into this story? Was it just a reaction to the typical urban fantasy with vampires and werewolves?
No, there is something to that. It was not meant to be a reaction or a counter reaction to the typical, but I do enjoy those stories too. I've read a lot of the werewolf and vampire stories, and I enjoy those urban fantasies a good bit. But my favorite stories have always been portal stories, usually people specifically from Earth, because I like the idea that someday I might get sucked through a portal to some other world and get to explore it. So those have always been my favorite stories, and I will have to save this for the spoiler section. But this is sort of a reverse portal story in the beginning, right? The first book is more like someone else stumbling onto our world. And that was more the concept I was trying to explore originally. Like, all right, I enjoy these portal stories where someone stumbles onto another world. Why wouldn't it happen the other way around? I guess think of it as a story written by someone on another world doing a fantasy about Earth.
It really took that expectation of, I also feel like urban fantasy is always like really gritty and detective stories. That's like what comes to mind when I think of that.
I mean, well, that's because I think the quintessential urban fantasy is like Dresden Files, which is very like dark and gritty and vampires and stuff.
But in this book, I don't think it's a spoiler to say we got an elf. We get some really fun classical fantasy.
Yeah, that was fun to put the classical characters in the modern world.
Yeah, and that's not something that I personally have seen a lot, and it was absolutely delightful.
Another derailment.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some, I'm going to call it an app. I don't remember if it was a Chrome plugin or a web page. I guess it was a web page where you can go submit your book, and for a price, they will tell you what books your writing is most similar to. And Dresden Files was one of mine. So it's ironic that you're saying the gritty urban. It's like, well, they say my style's just like that.
Style maybe, but substance not.
I enjoyed the Dresden Files. It just feels like, it is that. I mean, but this book has mystery too. I'm talking myself back out of it.
So this one does. The others don't, by the way, but this one does.
Well, we're discovering like why there is fantasy.
So
people
this one has
in New
extra
York.
mystery to it. Yeah.
Did I completely distract everything from the question that Sarah just asked?
We had to save some of it for the spoiler conversation. So we should, transition into the spoiler section.
Well, then, before we get there, Sarah, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you want to read a unique urban fantasy series with some Rambo-esque military action. Some fun Rambo-esque military action.
Ooh, and also the elite hacker scenes. Can't forget those. Those were fun. We haven't talked a whole lot about the actual plot of the book because I feel like that discovery in the first chunk is so important. So let's just go to spoilers.
It feels like spoilers, yeah.
Yeah. To avoid spoilers, skip to 40 minutes.
Before we actually start talking about the plot of the book, you did say that you had some more discussion about fantasy inspirations that you didn't want to talk about in the non-spoiler section.
I mean, in reality, the whole series is a portal story, right? The first book doesn't have that, but in the next book, they end up leaving Earth to go explore the other worlds and try to figure out how to fight this issue. And we're in spoilers, how to fight the bad guys. And so it really is a portal story where the beginning is setting everything up and how they decide they're going to leave. But that's really a nod to the stories that I enjoy. what is the name of the Tarwath series by Barbara Hambly. So that was one of my early inspirations from 30 years ago. Yeah, but I realized actually after I wrote all these that my favorite stories were all portal stories. So that's what this is.
Did you discover that in the course of writing this series?
After I finished, I was just thinking back and I was like, wait a minute.
That's so much fun. I love that. One thing that absolutely delighted me about this book was the very strong recurring theme of gentle giants. We have two characters that I would say fit this description. Bear, who was one of Red's compatriots in the military, and then also Grundle, who's a troll. And they both kick some major ass, but are also very sweet.
Yeah.
I loved them both, but then you go and kill off Bear. How could you do that?
Yeah, how dare you? That's our question. How dare you?
I had to. I had to.
Were you always intending to kill off a character? Was it always going to be Bear? Or is this something that as you were writing, you decided, actually, I need a character to die?
I had always intended to. I almost chickened out because I hated to lose him. But I don't know. I felt it needed a little more something. And there's some reason in book 2 that I needed that to happen. So there were reasons behind it. I probably could have written it differently and figured out a different way to have the problem in book 2 that needed to be solved.
I mean, the fact that we had an emotional reaction to it probably means you did the right thing.
I hope so.
Oh, and especially after we find out he was the only one who tried to help Red back in the flashbacks. Oh my God, heartbreaking.
There's a future reference to him in the other books as well that it kind of connects back in. I mean, more than just the psychological trauma that she goes through in the second book, but later on there's some pull-in from that he's not brought back to life or anything. But
right. Well, you've already established flashbacks, so we can still get more Bear theoretically.
Also, poor Red does not need more psychological trauma. What are you
Also
doing
fair.
to her in book 2? I mean, don't tell me I want to read it for myself, but also...
Oh, speaking of unhelpful hopes that we have for a series that's already written that we haven't read yet, I really loved the character of Cynthia, who is the wife of one of Red's compatriots. We don't see her on the page very much, but she seems very cool from what we do get, and I really hope there's more of her later.
So there's only little bits sprinkled through the whole thing. So she's a very supportive character through the whole thing, but she's never a main character.
But that feels right for her. But I'm glad that we do get a little more.
And I loved how supportive she was in all of her text messages to Rox. Like, he deserves a woman who's going to support him, and she deserves a husband who will support her. They seemed like they had a very loving relationship, and I appreciated that. Yeah,
they get into a pretty tough situation towards the end of the series, but
we'll leave it at that.
Oh no.
Their relationship is still great. The situation around them gets pretty bad. So that was fun too.
That's my favorite kind of tension. Like, I hate the on again, off again. Will they, won't they?
No, I didn't do that.
Like, give me a relationship and show me these characters dealing with conflict outside of themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty solid, but they have some rough stuff come against them through the stories. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think, like, if you're going to have relationship conflict, I think that's the kind of conflict that I enjoy reading about, where it's not conflict about the relationship, it's about how they are reacting to things outside of the relationship.
Yeah.
So how long do I have to wait for that plot line? When is that? You said later.
I can't remember if it's 3 or 4. It's definitely not 2.
All right.
I think the hardest part happens in book 4. Pretty sure. Yeah, it's almost all in book 4. So she plays, well, I mean, it's in her character, right? She doesn't want to be in the limelight. So even in the story, she's written not in the limelight. She's always there to support. But things get pretty rough in book 4, and they have some problems to solve. I guess it starts a little in book 3, but she doesn't get to play her role in it until book 4.
Well, I'm rooting for those crazy kids.
Yeah. And future spoiler alert, I plan to have a prequel and a sequel series to this. I mean, the story finishes, so it's another story, but they're going to be involved in that story, in the future story, Rox and Cynthia.
That's great news.
More
Very
films.
exciting.
That will also be problematic, but in a good way. Let's see, we didn't talk about this, but something you said earlier made me think of it. So Red was actually, when I was writing her, I was thinking of my oldest daughter, who right now is only 16. So she hasn't been in the army, she hasn't, but her personality is in that character. And in book 2, I think, you get to meet her parents, which is going to be, it's essentially me and my wife, but I swapped who was who. Kind of fun too, but they actually come to our house in that story.
That's so much fun. I love that.
Nobody knows that but me, and now you.
Yeah.
And everyone who is listening to this episode.
What a great little portal into the real world for them.
That's right.
A portal in a portal.
The clumsy dad is still me. The clumsiness is not my life. That aspect is still me.
One thing that I thought was handled very well was using Scan, one of our main characters, and occasional point of view character, using his process of learning magic to introduce the magic system to the reader. Can you tell us a little about that?
That was fine. This is a future spoiler for future books. So do you want to hear that in this podcast, or should we not? Should I word it differently?
That's up to you.
Part of what has to be solved in the story, in the overarching story, is something that makes sense from a programmer's point of view. So I needed to have a character in there who was someone who thought about things programmatically. And so he was there from the beginning, and how he learned to process magic is going to play a role in how the problems get solved downstream. You're right. It played a handy way because Red wasn't interested. She didn't care how the magic worked. She just, there's magic. I need to fight these things.
She just wanted to spark Grundle, and I loved that.
I mean, Red acts how I played D&D games. I just want to hit things.
I like that. Yeah, that would be my daughter's perspective. Yeah, so I needed somebody in there who was going to go in there and try to solve problems. And to solve problems, he had to understand the magic system. And yeah, that'll keep playing a role through the series.
So I read in your bio that you're an engineer. Is that software engineering? Is that where you got this kind of like programmatic approach to this story conflict?
I've done a lot of things. So my job right now is actually making chips, like hardening chips. I put the transistors and metals and stuff onto chips. But I do have a past in programming. So I actually made a shareware game back in 1990 that still floats around the web some. But yeah, I used to do quite a bit of programming. So I understand how all those pieces fit together. It definitely helped me write the character. I'm definitely a geek. Big time geek. And yeah, I understand programming well enough to be able to make those pieces fit together. I hope it read that way.
I mean, my day job is programmer, so I certainly enjoyed those aspects of it.
Oh, good. What kind of programming do you do? Am I allowed to ask that in the spoiler section?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a back-end software developer, mostly Python.
You mentioned earlier that you are sort of a combination planner and pantser. And so I was wondering if you could tell us about anything from this first book that surprised you when you got to it.
Oh, shoot. That was so long ago now. I don't know if I'll be able to remember.
How long ago was it that you actually wrote book 1?
I guess it seems longer than it actually was. I suppose that was only about between 3 and 4 years ago.
I mean, I could barely remember 3 to 4 weeks ago, so...
But you ought to be able to remember something 3 to 4 years ago, especially if you wrote it. This will actually kind of lead into the question. I have to show you this. I found this app called Case. It's basically a phone database that you can build arbitrary links. And so I have, characters, 111 characters. I have everything linked in here because by the time I was trying to write book 4, I couldn't remember everything. Like, how did I spell that guy's name in book 1? So I had to make this database to find my way around. But Cynthia was not intended. There was never supposed to be this supportive wife. So she popped in, and I enjoyed having her through the whole series. So she was just sort of an arbitrary thing that happened. There were definitely some things in there where I changed the story because something popped up that I was like, I think I want to explore that a little more. Oh, Agent Smith wasn't there originally, and she's in all four books now.
She's like a main character.
Yeah.
Yeah, so originally it was just the enemy being the government. And then I was like, it needs to be more of a face than the government. And then I one day wrote that little line about her name being like from The Matrix, the character from The Matrix, which when I wrote it was much further in the story because remember I changed the order of the chapters. So when I wrote that, it was actually much later. And then I was like, oh, I want that character. And then I kept writing her. And then I switched the order. So she appears very early in the story now. And she sticks around through the whole thing. But yeah, there's definitely stuff in there where I was like, that wasn't where I thought I was going originally, but I want to keep that. And then the story starts to fold around it. Honestly, I mean, some of it ended up being quite good. I don't mean that as a pat on the back way, but without that, the story would have been a lot less. So I'm glad that character or event or whatever made it in.
What's the Bob Ross quote? Happy little accidents.
Happy little accidents. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes those stumbles make you realize flaws in your thought process too. You're like, oh wait, that character's right. This doesn't work. or why didn't I do it this way? Why didn't she think of that? Oh man, she would have thought of that. And then you got to go back and rewrite something or explain why they didn't think of it because they were so busy doing this other thing. So right now I'm trying to write the prequel story, which you both only read book one, correct? So you don't even know who the prequel's about yet. So I won't say.
Spoilers upon spoilers upon spoilers.
Oh no, you do. She's the character that appears mysteriously at the end in the auditorium that's running down the. Yeah, she plays a vital role, particularly in book 3, but you see her more in book 2 as well. But the prequel is all about her. This is a very different experience for me because in writing these 4 books, when I got to the end, I purposefully went back and left some holes in it. I actually dug some holes in it. Right? I had some places where I had some pieces that I took out so that I could then go fill them in with the prequel later. So if you sit down and read all 4 books, there are some things that are unexplained, and they will mostly be explained in the prequel. Some are waiting for a sequel, but they're mostly explained in the prequel. But now that I'm sitting down and trying to map all that out, it doesn't fit that well. So I'm like, all right, how do I make this and this and this all work out? And it's actually kind of fun because you create your own problems and then you have to go solve them. And, that's part of the story itself. And the prequel has changed quite a bit from my realizing flaws and how those pieces conflict and have to be resolved. So it's fun. You have both the characters and the plot kind of intertwining and causing their own problems.
It sounds like you have quite a jigsaw puzzle ahead of you.
Yeah.
I do. It's a good jigsaw puzzle, though.
I love that intentionality.
Yeah, I've got to fill in those holes. It's got to come together. That's the engineer in me. It can't not make sense in the end. I got to tell you, there's nothing I hate more than a book by a pantser that gets to the end and they just sort of happily resolve everything by, some bizarre circumstance. And I'm like, oh, come on. That didn't fit together at all. You just stopped writing.
Well, it sounds like that's not what we're going to get from your series.
Yeah, this certainly resolves, except for, as I mentioned, a few pieces that I purposefully left unresolved. And I don't even think most people, I think a lot of people notice them. Many people won't even notice the things that didn't get resolved. Well, we'll see.
We'll find out, yeah.
Pretty quick read, right?
Oh, yeah. I think I started it on Monday, so 3-ish days.
I sometimes feel like it was too short. When I listen to some of your other podcasts, the books are very long. You're struggling to get through them in time.
I thought it was the right length. I prefer when a book is around that 350 page, it makes it so much easier for podcasting, just from a practical level.
Mine's 350 pages with big print. So it's actually shorter than that.
I prefer it when a book is the right length for the story.
That too.
And I hate when long books are like, you're just doing this because you wanted to have a fat book on the shelf. Get rid of it. None of this needed to be there. So Short or long doesn't matter.
Book 3 is my longest.
Yeah.
You'll have to tell me if it was too long. If you get to it, you'll have to tell me if it was too long.
Well, you'll definitely hear my opinion on the matter. I don't know if that makes it the decision as much as I'd like to think so.
Thank you so much for joining us for this. This has been just absolutely wonderful having you on. You have talked a little bit about your current projects. You said that you're writing a prequel series. You said that it's kind of spoilery, so I don't know how much you can tell us about that, but
tease us.
If there's anything you can share, we'd love to hear it.
So the prequel story is about the elf world before they ever figure out how to get off world. So it's the early days of magic as it's first being discovered. So the series is called Thaumatropic Roots, so the root of magic. And it's about the old gods that you will see get mentioned throughout the series. So when the elves get together, they're talking about their old gods. So this story is about the old gods and how they uncover how magic works and how to go explore other worlds. Yeah, and it'll explain some of the things that are gaps in the existing story, purposefully left gaps in the existing story.
I'm very excited. And you also mentioned that you're writing or that you have the idea for a sequel series, but I'm assuming that the prequel is going to come out first.
That's right. So the prequel will actually, by explaining those gaps, it will set up what the problem is for the sequel. So right now, when the Guardian League series finishes, it's not really obvious that there's a problem that needs to be solved. But once you go through the prequel, you're going to realize that there's a looming problem that's still going to crop up again. And then it will make sense to have the future-looking series, the forward-looking series. I hint at it at the end of the book 4, but it's not really obvious.
Obvious in retrospect, maybe. That makes it good fodder for a reread. Very good.
There you go.
Very good strategy.
Indeed. And if people want to go and buy your books, follow you on social media, where can they do all of that?
So my books are mostly through Amazon. So you can find the Kindle or buy paperback or now hardback through Amazon. I do have something set up through Ingram Spark, but I think that's really how you sell to booksellers like Barnes and Nobles. I don't think individuals go by through that. And my Instagram is stephen.j.morris.writer. And I think Facebook would be the same. I didn't actually go look when I had the chance.
And Instagram is the place where people should go to find updates about your work?
I usually post to both Instagram and Facebook at the same time. So either one works. And I see that I have very different following on both of them. I don't know what that means. I don't understand social media well enough.
Oh, the mysterious ways of the algorithm.
And if people want to go buy your books from a physical store, it sounds like there's a Barnes & Noble in Austin where they can do so, if anyone's
That's
from
correct.
Austin or passing through Austin.
Or a few other mysterious places somewhere, because I can see the orders got placed, but I don't know where they went.
But we know for sure that there's some in a Barnes & Noble in Austin.
Everyone keep your eye out. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been an absolute pleasure.
I had so much fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.